Now we'd like to welcome our guests from the Supreme Court Curator's Office, the curator himself, Matt Hofstedt, and his Deputy Curator, Nikki Peronace. Matt has been with the Curator's Office since 1996, the year I started in Chief Justice Rehnquist's chambers as his counselor. In a variety of roles, Matt has served at the court and recently was named the fourth curator in the Supreme Court's history. Nikki was recently promoted to Deputy Curator in March after serving as the court's Visitors Program Manager for 10 years. And I would like to talk to both of them about their important work at the court and its evolution. And we're going to take questions from the audience as well, and you can share your questions in the Q&A box on your Zoom window. Let's start with Matt first. And many people may be unaware that the court even has a curator's office, Matt. So let's talk about its history and why it was created and what it does.
Sure thing, Jim. Thanks to you and everyone at the Society for inviting Nikki and I to come on today. It's obviously the first week of court term, so a good time to talk about how we visit the court. And so a little bit about the curator's office. It was founded in 1973, just a year before the society itself was formed. It was part of the brainchild of Chief Justice Warren Burger, who wanted to have places for the court's history to be told within the building, and also to reach out and do more public education about the history of the court and to make the building seem a little bit more welcoming. And so the first curator was a woman named Kathy Skifos, and she was a one-woman shop back in 1973, and she started the curator's office pretty much from scratch. There had been some prior court officers who had collected things. The court had a collection of portraits and busts and things like that. But she was the first one to sort of set out to start an exhibition program in the ground floor of the building, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But she had to relocate out of the DC area, and one of Justice Lewis Powell's secretaries, Gail Galloway, became a second curator and was very instrumental in sort of building out what other functions the court curator would do, built staff. And then when she retired, one of her number one assistants was Catherine Fitz, who became the third curator, and she did an amazing job of building on this legacy of the earlier curators, and it was influential in starting our volunteer docent program, which we'll also talk a little bit about as we move on in this program. And luckily, I was then named just last year to become the fourth curator. The four kind of core programs that we do for the court are the exhibitions program, which we're going to delve into a little bit more, and kind of hand in hand in that is the collections part of that. So we have historic objects that we've collected over the years, and we care for those. We decorate rooms around the court building, and then we also use those in the exhibitions program. We also have what's called the court photographer, and that's folks on our staff here who do a lot of the internal photography for the court, and they do a great job of documenting all the different things that happen here throughout the year. And then finally, there's our visitor programs, which is a key component to what we call the visitor experience that we're trying to, when you do come into the building, have a good experience here where you can learn something about the court and find sort of a welcoming environment, which you might not imagine when you think of the court in the exterior of the building. It's sort of intimidating. And as I think Claire even mentioned, people may not expect that there is any of these things inside the building. And so we're happy to provide those things sort of as one of our core missions, if you will.
It's really remarkable to have seen the evolution of the exhibits and the ground floor, which is utilized so well. I started working at the Supreme Court in 1975 in Chief Justice Burger's chambers as a chambers aide. And at that time, the ground floor of the court building was still pretty much a basement. I know Kathy Citos has, began in the with putting the exhibits together and started but it is absolutely remarkable to see how far it's come and progressed, and the visitors' experience is greatly enhanced by your work and what you're doing. Nikki, you were recently appointed Deputy Curator, having served as the Visitors Program Manager for many years. Tell us about the work of your office in the visitors' experience, which was really at the forefront of Chief Justice Berger's mind when he created the office, the Curator's office, and wanted to convert the ground floor more from a basement to a museum quality, which it currently is today.
Definitely. Thank you, Jim. So I think as Matt alluded to, the mission of the Office of the Curator is to promote a greater public understanding and appreciation of the nation's highest court. So on the visitor programs side of that equation, we are trying to ensure that visitors are not intimidated by the Supreme Court and that they walk away with a very engaging and memorable experience. So it is primarily a self-guided experience for visitors. So visitors can come into the building, they can explore the ground floor exhibitions, they can go to the cafe, they can visit the gift shop. They can also experience the courtroom in a couple of different ways. So one of the frequently asked questions that we get all the time is, where is the courtroom? Quickly followed by, can I see it? And the answer to that is yes. So in order to go inside the courtroom, there are two ways of doing that. One is by attending court. So of course, in order to do that, you have to visit on a day when the court is in session and hearing arguments or sitting for a non-argument session. And then the other way to actually go inside the courtroom is to attend a courtroom lecture. So that's the public program that's managed by the visitor programs staff. And it's offered on days when the court is not sitting. It's a seated presentation that's about 25 minutes in duration. And it's basically Supreme Court 101. So much like one of our new exhibitions that's on the ground floor that's called From Petition to Opinion, we're literally trying to take visitors on a journey to understand how cases come before the court, what they would expect to see and hear if they actually came and attended an oral argument, and a little bit about how cases are decided from a purely procedural standpoint. And if there's time, the courtroom lecture may include some information about the building history and its architectural features as well. So those programs are free. They are first come, first serve. So the way to attend is you just get in line in the Great Hall that's located on the first floor, right outside the courtroom. And typically they're offered 5 times a day. So it's 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30, and 2:30. Although I do caution that the court, of course, first and foremost is a working building. So there may be times when the business of the court can impact our public program schedule and other types of building access. But you just go on the court's website, see what's happening on that day, and come and attend a lecture if that's of interest. So I think kind of to summarize what the typical visitor experience is often like, it's seeing the courtroom in some way, whether you're just taking a peek at it from the entrance or you're actually attending a courtroom lecture, exploring the exhibits, and then maybe taking a trip to the cafe and the gift shop as well.
We encourage that as well, the gift shop. What are the court's visiting hours, and when do you think, what's the best time of year, do you think, to visit the court? And then that may depend on what your goal is. If it's to see the court in session, obviously you want to do it from October through probably April, May, but I'll let you inform our audience about that.
Sure. So I hope one of the big takeaways from this discussion is that it is possible to visit the Supreme Court building. So whether you want to attend an oral argument and that's your goal, or whether you just want to come in and take a peek at the courtroom, attend a courtroom lecture or not, and just learn more about the court from its exhibitions and perhaps conversations that you have with our volunteer docents who might be staffing the visitor desk. But I think the first thing to do if you're interested in visiting the court is to go on the court's website. And this is definitely an instance where a little bit of advanced planning goes a very long way, because right on the court's homepage, there is a calendar There's a Today at the Court box that says what the building hours are. It says whether the court is or is not in session that day. So that's really critical information that you would want to know up front. Is the court sitting today or is it not sitting today? Because the court doesn't sit every single day. And if you're interested in attending an oral argument, it's first come, first served. There's a line that forms on East Capitol Street right along the side of the Supreme Court building. And on those days, the building is otherwise closed. So that is an important piece of information to know. So if you're interested in coming and just kind of touring the building on a self-guided basis, you want to come on a non-sitting day when the court is not in session. And the building hours are Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., with the exception of weekends and federal holidays, and of course, the days when the court is in sitting. So in terms of the best times of year to come and visit the court, if you're a fan of the colder months, that's probably the best time to come. So usually from about November until the first week in March is the slower visitation period. And then typically once we hit right around the second week of March, all the way through July, that is peak season. And that's not just at the Supreme Court. I mean, that's peak season in DC in general, with cherry blossoms in March, and then lots and lots of 8th grade class trips that start up in March and then just keep going for months. So that's the busy season. But you know, of course, I would encourage people to come any time of year, whatever fits their schedule.
It's open year round.
Year round.
Yeah. Matt, the Society and the Curator's Office has a long and good history together. Could you describe the exhibitions program and its history and some of the court's current exhibits, which are just outstanding? And I alluded to this earlier, really museum quality exhibits that you've put together. And I can't exaggerate how informative and professional they are.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. Yeah, we've been doing exhibits inside the building since the 1970s, as I said earlier. And the Historical Society and the court curators have worked very closely together in sort of developing the collection and finding objects to both decorate some of our private spaces. Chief Justice Berger had come in, and the building had original furniture put in it in 1935. But when he came in as Chief Justice, he wanted to sort of spruce things up a bit, I think. And so they started collecting some American decorative arts to decorate some of the private spaces that the justices used. This is sort of in following what had happened at the White House in the 1960s, and also the diplomatic reception rooms at the State Department, where they were trying to highlight and make these rooms more attractive than some of the sort of standard furniture that had been installed in the 1930s. So the society was very influential in helping some of those things come to fruition. At the same time, the public exhibition program was started, and the collection here at the court, as I had mentioned earlier, had been sort of started by an earlier marshal of the court. His name was Thomas Wagaman. He served as a page all the way up to marshal of the court in the 1930s and 40s into the 1950s. And he was an amateur historian and loved collecting antiques. And he sort of started the genesis of this collection of historical materials that he could show people when they came into the building. And so that was sort of what was already here in the building when the first curator came on board. And then since then, with the help of the society, you know, they're able to accept donations of other historical materials. There were several exhibits that were designed about a particular justice. There were exhibits on the John Marshall era, Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes and Earl Warren. And each of those exhibits happens, you know, people contact descendants and find things in their attics, and they would donate them to the court. And so those are kind of the things that we use in the exhibits today. And then we continue to try to encourage people, anyone out there that might be listening to this one day, if you have any Supreme Court artifacts at home, please let us know. Got to put in a pitch for that. And then what we do is we take those and we try to create these stories, either about a life of a justice, sort of how they became a justice, the different things. They often have done interesting things in their, prior to becoming justices. And we hope to, sometimes inspire people to get involved in the law and a career, in the judiciary. And then we also more recently have started to work towards doing some of what I know the society is very involved in with civics education, and try to provide some basic understanding of how the court systems work and how the Supreme Court fits into that whole system and its important role. So our current exhibit, as Nikki mentioned earlier, is called From Petition to Opinion, the Supreme Court at Work, basically. And so one side of the hallway, and I don't know if the picture is going to show up, there's part of the exhibit there, is about sort of the step-by-step, like how do we get justices? How do they get appointed to the court and confirmed by the Senate? And then how do cases percolate up through the lower courts and then eventually get petitioned to the Supreme Court? And then what happens at each of those steps in this process? And then it also goes into then once the court decides to hear a case, then what is the process within the court itself? So what are the justices going to do? Voting to accept a case, there's a rule of 4 that all 4 of the 9 have to agree the case should come to the court. And then once it's accepted, they hear oral argument, they read briefs, and then they make their decisions and announce it. And so each of those steps is sort of explained in one side of the exhibit. The other side, we kind of looked at some various types of issues that sort of continually have come back before the court over time. And we kind of use the words of the Constitution, different sections, to sort of set the tone of like, this is what the Constitution is talking about, and here's where court cases have interpreted those parts of the Constitution, but also the statutory interpretation that the justices have to do in many of the cases. And just trying to get a very basic understanding of these things so that a visitor might actually, think about, oh, those are the types of things that the Supreme Court gets involved with, not all the thousands of other cases that happen across the country every day. And we've added some interactives, which you saw in the picture, which sort of profile a few historical cases. It's obvious we don't go into the current cases that are before the court. We only work with mostly historical materials for obvious reasons. But that's sort of the idea in that exhibit, is to sort of get people sort of thinking about the general work of the court and where it fits into our system of federal government. The other exhibit that we just opened last year, actually it's almost like a case study of one case and how the court got involved in that. And that's a case called, the exhibit's called Integration Must Proceed Forthwith. And it profiles the case called Cooper v. Aaron that reached the Supreme Court following the Brown versus Board of Education case that ordered the desegregation of public schools. Well, obviously, all around the country, there were some people that protested this, and in this case in Little Rock, where the famous Little Rock 9, the brave children and their families that decided to petition to integrate their schools immediately were part of this case, and that case comes back to the Supreme Court eventually. And there's a very famous moment in this case where the governor of Arkansas blocks the school and doesn't let the kids go into the school. And there's a federal judge, Ronald Davies. He's on the left in the picture, if you can see it here, and that's his robe on the right. And that's the bench that he actually used to decide those cases down in Little Rock. They were doing some renovations in the building on the federal courthouse down there, and we were able to temporarily bring it up here to Washington and use that as the focal point for discussing this important case. And what really brings powerful message through with this case is that all 9 of the current justices, as well as retired Justice Breyer, all sat down for interviews to talk about this case and the various aspects of how the Constitution interprets it and how the executive branch has to enforce rules, sometimes things that the court issues. And so it's a really great exhibit, I think, that sort of brings all this into one focused point in this case.
If I might interrupt you on that for a second, Matt, because the video display in that exhibit has the interviews with each of the justices describing the importance of the case, and it's the current justices and retired Justice Breyer as well, and it's fascinating to hear their viewpoints about the importance of that case. But it's very well done. The film that accompanies the physical exhibit itself is well worth a visit. And yeah, your office should be very proud of that one. There was another exhibit, a recent one that goes back to what you were saying about collaborating with the society on, and that's the Brandeis robe,
Yes.
and working with that family. You might describe that just briefly before moving on to your next point. I'm sorry I interrupted you on that, but
No worries. I don't know if the picture can get pulled up, but we added two what we call our highlights cases. They're these beautiful museum exhibit cases where we can show some of our larger objects. So in one, we have the bench chair of Chief Justice John Marshall from 1819. And we talk about some of the traditions of the court in that case. And then we were able, with the help of the society, some descendants of Justice Brandeis had one of his judicial robes still, and they donated that to the society for use in the court's exhibit program. And we were able to have it go through some conservation, and it's on exhibit now, along with some other information about his career on the bench. Justice Brandeis was such an influential justice, and so it's an honor to have that robe in our collection now and sort of be able to share that story with our visitors. The other exhibits that are on the ground floor, there's a great exhibit still that's been up for a few years. It's about the rise of what are called the lady lawyers back in the day, and how they became eventually Supreme Court justices. So that you go from the first woman who was admitted to the Supreme Court bar all the way through to the current justices that are on our court today. And so that's a great journey and very, I think, inspiring exhibit that we're very proud of. And there's a great exhibit about group court photographs, the tradition of how that's happened over the years. And of course, there's all the portraits and busts of the former justices that are on exhibit in the building. We have too many now. We can't put them all out. So we kind of rotate them through. We have a new digital portrait stations, we call them, where you can look up any justice and see their portrait. And one of the things I'd like to say here is that just to clarify for people, current justices, the ones actually sitting on the court today, their portraits are not put out in the building until they leave the bench. And that's a question we often get, and Nikki can probably attest to this. So where's Justice so-and-so's portrait? Well, those don't come out until after they've left the bench. And so we know we have disappointed visitors when they can't find them, but we can't put those out too soon.
Nikki, when you enter the building, there's an array of visitors' guides and brochures that they may take. Would you mind describing those briefly for us, and who are the target audiences for those guides?
Sure. So I think one of the silver linings of COVID, back in 2020, 2021, was it really gave us an opportunity to think about how to enhance the visitor experience during a time when no visitors were actually coming into the building. And pre-COVID, we really didn't have a whole lot of printed materials. We didn't have any self-guides. We didn't have any activities for students and families that had really been on our wish list for forever. So pre-COVID, the only thing that we had were visitor maps. Visitor maps are extremely important. We still have them in 10 languages. We also have a tactile map that we have integrated in the last couple of years that includes tactile symbols, Braille, and large print, which we're very happy to have that installed. But specifically during COVID, we worked on developing a variety of self-guided materials for visitors. So I'll do a little bit of show and tell myself. You can kind of see this. So we have a self-guide to the interior architectural features of the building. And pretty much anytime I see anybody walking around the building these days, I feel very proud because almost always they have one of these in their hand. So we don't have guided tours of the Supreme Court building. So we wanted people to have the ability to get all of this great information on their own. So we've got the self-guide to the building's interior architecture. We also have a self-guide to the building's exterior architecture. So you can walk around the Supreme Court building grounds and get lots of great information about the pediments and the statues that are on the front plaza and what do they symbolize. And then we also have this trifold highlights brochure, which I think of as really being designed for the person who comes in and they say, I only have 15 minutes, what are the don't miss aspects of the Supreme Court building? Or, I've never been here before, where do I even start? What shouldn't I miss? and we have done all the work for you. So this is highlights of the interior of the building, but it also focuses on some of our current exhibitions that we don't want people to miss. And then those are our self-guides. And then we've also developed a variety of activities for students and families, which I should mention they're available on site, but they're also on the court's website. So you can go online, you can download these as PDFs, you can print them out. So on the kids side of things, we have what we call our kids activity booklet, which has this really cute cartoon tortoise named Lex. And this is geared towards, younger elementary school students to introduce them to the Supreme Court with help of their cartoon guide Lex. And then for a slightly older audience, kind of upper elementary to maybe middle school, we have our activity booklet, which includes a portrait hunt. So as Matt was saying, you can go on the ground floor and other parts of the building and explore different portraits of past justices. So we had this kind of scavenger hunt idea where people could go and try to find the portrait and then learn more about that particular justice. There's word searches, there's all kinds of activities that are included here. And then what is probably my personal favorite is our coloring booklet, which of course is fun for everyone. What was, I think, really important to us as we were developing this, we actually made all of the images in this coloring booklet ourselves, is we didn't just want it to be a coloring book, we wanted it to be educational as well. So there's content explaining, who are you coloring? This is John Jay, or this is the Supreme Court seal, and here's some information about that as well. So we have self-guides, we have activity booklets, and hopefully more to come.
Well, you've really enhanced the visitor experience by making this available to the visitors, and it is a magnificently beautiful building. And for those in our audience who haven't been to visit, we encourage you to do so. And it's certainly being given you'll have a more pleasant experience and informative experience these days than used to be the case when visitors came to the court. So we're very grateful for the work of your offices. How many visitors a year does the court get? And maybe you mentioned COVID. Of course, the building was shut down for 2 or 3 years during that period of time. And have you seen a difference in the visitor numbers before and after COVID?
Sure. So pre-COVID, the court was seeing north of 400,000 visitors per year. And as you mentioned, the building was closed on account of COVID for a couple of years. So it reopened to the public in December of 2022. And, not all the visitors came back at once. So I think what we have seen is basically a gradual uptick in visitation. The numbers are not what they were pre-COVID, but I don't think that that's unique to the court. I think that that's
right.
Consistent with what a lot of other museums and institutions are seeing kind of in general in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if traffic's any measure, I think that's true. It hasn't resumed to what it was pre-COVID just yet. Yeah, but we're on the way. How do you become a docent at the court? And you might describe that program too for those who would be interested.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, how do we manage those high volume days, or really any day that we have on the visitor programming side of things at the court? Volunteers are essential to our operation, and all of our volunteers are docents. We refer to them as docents at the Supreme Court. And there's a very high likelihood that if you come and visit the court, the person that you're interacting with is a volunteer. We have volunteer docents who staff our visitor desk. The docents also give the lion's share of our courtroom lectures, although that's something we also train our curatorial interns to do as well. And occasionally you may get a staff person giving a courtroom lecture, but really it's the docents. So to apply for the docent program, you go right on the Supreme Court website. At the very bottom of the homepage is a link for jobs. And then once you click on jobs, there's a menu that will give you Supreme Court docent program. You click on that, and then it will probably take no more than 10-15 minutes to fill out the online application, which will be reviewed by the visitor program staff. And we accept docent applications on a rolling basis. So even if we're not in a position where we're actively recruiting or know that we have a new training planned, by all means, submit an application. We'll keep it on file. And then, when we get to a point where we're looking to bring more people on board, we'll take a look at those. I will say now's a good time to apply for the docent program, hint, hint, because we are looking to bring a few more docents on board probably early in 2025. So I suspect interviews would be starting relatively soon.
Thank you. Matt, what would you say some of the challenges are that the curator's office faces in achieving its missions?
There's a couple challenges. I think Claire actually mentioned one when she was talking about her book earlier about how do you collect about objects of an institution that doesn't really create any objects. There's opinions and things like that, but really other than robes and chairs, there's not a lot of material culture that comes out of the court itself, which is why I think we've focused over the years with the society on sort of collecting the lives of the justices. So things they may have done before the court, sometimes after the court, and sort of to tell those stories, and then sort of the institutional things and the court in popular culture, for example, how it's represented and things like that. So we have those types of things. So that's a challenge, is trying to find those things. I think the second challenge is obviously how do you make something that is incredibly complex that the justices are dealing with in what they do in hearing and deciding cases. How do you make that at least in somewhat understandable to a very general audience? And so our exhibits are not intended to be books on the wall and trying to have every last explanation of every last possibility. They're very basic, fundamental sort of concepts about what the court does and how it operates. And we hope that people will take those and then spark an interest and they can go learn more and go elsewhere to find those things. Because the last thing we want is, thousands of words on the wall. And I think the third one I would mention is the Supreme Court building itself is a difficult place to do, if you will, museum work. It's a beautiful building, and it's monumental architecture is lovely to explore and see, but it's all marble. So everything echoes. And when you have, as Nikki said, thousands of people coming through the building a day while people are trying to work on quiet, intense work, those two things don't always, line up very well. So I think there's issues with that. Cass Gilbert was a great architect, but while they put a few places to hang portraits, they didn't think about having exhibits and gift shops and things like that in the building. And so the building's been adapted to that, but you're really doing these things in hallways. And so sound echoes. And so we can't do anything with any sort of sound when we do our installations. We have to find a room where we can do that elsewhere. And there's just isn't a lot of space to do that. But, we've adapted. We've done, I think, a great job of using what is available and trying to, again, make that a moment of people come through that door. And I think you started earlier, Jim, with the whole, people don't even know that there's a curator's office. I think there are a lot of people that come into the building and they're pleasantly surprised that there's things in there for them to do once they get inside. And that's one of the reasons we're here today, is to sort of spread the word a little bit. And once they're in there, oh, great, I can learn about this. There's these things. Look at these great books that I can pick up and take with me. And I would be remiss to not thank all of the other amazing staff people at the court that we work with. We do a piece of this, but we have an amazing police force that interacts with the public every day, and they do a great job. Our public information office, our marshal's office, the building support staff that makes the building look beautiful every day and keeps it clean and tidy. I mean, those are all people that are part of this team that does this the visitor experience as best that we can. And I just wanted to make sure I thanked them for all that they do. And I think you won't find too many other places with such a dedicated staff that's dedicated to the institution and the mission of the court than the staff at the court. And it's really a great place to work and always has been. So I'll close up with, actually, I think we have a few minutes if any questions came in. I think you were going to try to do that. So.
We do, Matt, and thank you and Nikki very much for the presentation, and it's very informative. How do you go? One question is, how do you go about deciding and planning for exhibits, and what's the shelf life of a typical exhibit, if you will? How often is there turnover, and what's the whole planning process for that?
Okay, I'll take that one. Depending on which type of exhibit, some are intended almost to be semi-permanent. The new installation in the lower Great Hall about how the court works is probably a 5 to 10 year possible installation. It depends on how it ages, and if it's, people are finding it useful. There are objects in the cases that we can change out. So that's intentionally designed that way so that we can change the objects, but the general content is the same. And we could change the interactives if we needed to, but that's a sort of a long-term thing. The other exhibits we try to rotate every 1 to 2 years. It just depends on our ability to come up with an idea for an exhibit, and then we shop it inside our office, and then we have several offices within the court that help us define those things. And then, of course, obviously, everything gets signed off on by the Chief Justice, so he'll usually have to say, okay, that sounds like a good idea. We'll let you do that one. And I can tell you right now, Nikki is working on an exhibit on Harlan Fiske Stone, a former Chief Justice, for his 100th anniversary of coming on the court. Will be coming down the pike. And then we're also working on, I think, one to tie in with the 250th anniversary celebrations that are going on for the nation's, independence. Even though the court wasn't around in those days,
No.
we'll try to tie into that as well.
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions is, when the court was built, and where was it housed before this magnificent building that you were in?
So going way back, the court first sat in New York City for 1 year, 1 year, right? Nikki will correct me, and then moved down to Philadelphia. And met in what is now Independence Hall. There's a building off to the left called City Hall, now the old City Hall, and the court met there for about 10 years. And then came down to Washington with the federal government, first sitting in the Capitol in 1801, and then met in several rooms throughout the Capitol as it changed until 1935, when this building opened. So this building was conceived in the 1920s. Was built in the early 1930s, and the court moved in the summer of 1935.
Are all of your exhibits and the materials that have been added to the court's collections, do they necessarily come from the court and its history, or are there artifacts that you've also integrated within the court that are just historical in nature of American history?
Most of the things we try to collect are related to the court's history or the justices. We do have some decorative arts pieces that are used in some of the rooms that are not particularly have a provenance to the court or a justice. And there are a few artworks that have been donated over the years that are not court specific. But for the most part, we have a pretty narrow scope. I mean, with 116 justices to sort of collect on, there's a lot of room to do that. And there's probably a Supreme Court case that you can connect to pretty much anything that happened in American history. So we do have sort of a broad mandate for collecting.
Do the appeals courts provide artifactual materials to the Historical Society and to the curator's office?
My understanding is there are no other federal curators in other federal courthouses that I'm aware of. There are a lot of librarians and other court staffers at lower federal courts that play the role of a historian or curator for their courthouses and have some collections. There are several historical societies now, many modeled after the Supreme Court Historical Society, that work with the lower courts in collecting their history. So I think they're out there. We don't collect those things up here at the Supreme Court.
Okay. One more question we have time for here. There used to be a video in a booth somewhere on the lower ground level of the court building that included all or most of the justices talking about the court. I remember that video. Um, uh, and I remember Justice Powell and specifically in that video talking about how being nominated to the court was like being struck by lightning.
Right.
Is it still there and is it operational? And I would add to the question myself, can you access it? Could anyone access that video?
So that film is no longer running in the court. There had been for probably 30 years various iterations of a visitor film with the justices talking and talking about the court's history.
Yeah.
During COVID, the film that we were running prior to that sort of aged out. And when we had the opportunity to do the Cooper v. Aaron exhibit in that space, we did that. So the current justices are in that film. They're talking about the case, not court's history. We have copies of all of those films digitized. And one of the things that Nikki and I are going to be working on in the future is to try to maybe enhance some of the historical materials that are available on our court website. And so that's one of the things we have on our list of possibly finding a place to host them somewhere so people can see them. Some may even be on YouTube today. I'm not sure. And I know C-SPAN was instrumental in the last film, and I believe most of the interviews of that film are still available on their website.
Oh, great.
But the old one with Justice Powell is not, I don't think, anywhere other than maybe on our digital copy.
Wow. It was well done. And
It was.
but you're making remarkable progress within your office, and we're so grateful for it. The public is, the society is. We're glad to be a part of it, and hope for helpful to you because you're certainly enhancing the visitor's experience. All of those who come to the court, almost 500,000 a year. I know in peak years, it was sometimes even over 500,000, I think, but now it's about 400,000 is what you were describing. Well, I want to thank Matt, you and Nikki very much, and I encourage the audience to visit the court and to visit the Society's website and information about the court. And we're very grateful that you joined us today, Matt
Thank you,
and
Jim.
Nikki. And
All right.
thank you
you
for
so
that.
much. All right. Bye-bye.
We thank you all very much for joining us today. And again, we encourage you to visit the court when you have an opportunity. Thank you.